COIL is a hidden universal, a code, a key for which the whole does not exist, is non-existent, in silence and secrecy, a spell, a spiral, a serpent's oast around a female cycle, a whirlwind, a double helix, DNA, electricity and elementals, atonal noise and brutal poetry. COIL is amorphous, luminous and in constant change. Inbuilt obsolescence, inbuilt disobedience, a vehicle for obsessions, dream cycles in perpetual motion. We are cutthroats, infantile, immaculately conceived, diseased. The virus is chaos, the cure is delirium. COIL are archangels of chaos. The price we pay for existence is eternal warfare. There is a hidden coil of strength, dormant beneath the sediment of convention. Dreams lead us under the surface, over the edge, to the delirium state, unchained. Past impositions and false universals, reassembling into our order. COIL, who has the nerve to dream, create and kill, while the whole moves and every part stands still. Our rationale is the irrational. Hallucination is the truth our graves are dug with. COIL is compulsion, urge and construction. Dead letters fall from our shedding skins. Kabbalah and chaos, Thanatos and Thelema, archangels and antichrists, open and close, truth and liberation, traps and disorientation. COIL exists between here and here. We are Janus-headed, plural, out of time, out of place, out of spite. An antidote for when people become poisons. COIL know how to destroy angels, how to paralyze. Imagine the world in a bottle. We take that bottle, smash it, and open your throat with it. I warn you, we are murderous. We massacre the logical revolts. We know everything. We know one thing only. We know nothing. Absolute existence, absolute motion, absolute direction, absolute truth. Now, here, us. Not knowing what is, and is not knowing I knew not. Hassan Isaba.
Pretentious.
No, it's...
It sounds good.
It took me about a year to feel safe. Anybody else other than John?
Cut down the trees to make paper disease.
But I have this concept that Christianity wants to light the world up. Literally, the light of Christ is street lighting, because and it's orange. The future's orange, because Christians think that, and and the Western thing is like, if it's lit up, it's safe, and that's absolutely not true. I think the darkness is the safest place.
Well, they're frightened of the darkness because they can't control what's in the darkness because it's not exposed.
It's this ridiculous simplistic darkness equals evil, light equals good, and it's just not true. Nature just proves it's not true.
Return the Book of Knowledge. Return the Marble Index. Fire and the Paradox. The forest is a college. Each tree a university. It's in the trees. It's coming. The forest is a college. Each tree a university.
Goedenavond, welkom bij Supplement. Vanavond staat de uitzending geheel in het teken van de Engelse experimentele popgroep COIL. We weten dat er vanavond ook internationaal veel zal worden geluisterd via NPS Web Radio dus. Web radio listeners, welcome to Supplement. Please visit our website www.nps.nl/supplement, which is written with a double P, for a complete overview of this broadcast. And we will now continue in Dutch. COIL, voor sommigen oude bekenden, voor anderen volslagen vreemd. En met 4 uur lang COIL wordt het voor die eerste groep in ieder geval genieten. Vooral vanaf 10 uur vanavond. Dan onbekend en nog niet eerder uitgebracht materiaal. Verder de première van de nieuwe COIL EP op Eschaton, dat is COIL's eigen label. En zo tegen 11 uur het enige concert dat COIL in ons land gaf. Opgenomen in Paradiso Amsterdam op 1 juni van dit jaar en digitaal gemasterd vanaf Meersporen, speciaal voor deze uitzending. En voor diegenen die COIL nog niet kennen, dat zal na vanavond anders zijn. We geven tot 10 uur een chronologisch beeld van het ontstaan van COIL tot in de jaren 90. COIL is opgetrokken rond Peter Sleazy Christofferson en Jeff Rushton, alias John Balance, en kent sinds haar oprichting in 1983 een aantal wisselende samenstellingen en verbanden, onder meer met Alex Ferguson, Steven Thrower, Clint Ruin, alias Fetus, Gavin Friday, Mark Almond, Boyd Rice en Nine Inch Nails. Maar de kern is altijd gelijk gebleven. COIL staat nu al bijna 20 jaar aan het front van de Europese experimentele popmuziek en staat bekend als innovatief en vernieuwend, altijd op zoek naar manieren om de mainstream wakker te schudden, een bewustzijn te geven of het juist te ontnemen. En soms muziek binnen de grenzen van het occulte of zelfs obscene te trekken. Van de 2 leden heeft vooral Peter Christofferson een legendarische achtergrond. In de jaren 70 als gevierd hoesontwerper voor onder meer Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd en Yes met het collectief Hypnosis. Medeoprichter Van achtereenvolgens Coom Transmissions, Throbbing Gristle en Psychic TV. En ook regisseur van talloze videoclips van Diamanda Gallis en The tot aan Paul McCartney en Van Halen. En ook produceerde hij mee aan verschillende platen. En alsof dat nog niet genoeg is hij ook nog maker van commercials voor Pan Am, Coca-Cola, Nike en McDonald's. Er wordt beweerd dat ook enkele muziektermen door hem zijn geïntroduceerd, zoals industrial music en glitch. Maar met name de groepen Throbbing Gristle en Psychic TV, waar Christofferson deel van uitmaakte, hebben een behoorlijke impact gehad op de experimentele en elektronische popmuziek. Waar punk al gauw verviel in een trend, een modieus begrip, werd de industriële muziek van Throbbing Gristle als bizar en chockerend ervaren. Er werd geëxperimenteerd met elektronica en video, de grenzen van de performance art werden afgetest en het was aanleiding voor het ontstaan van het geluid van groepen als Cabaret Voltaire, Nurse with Wound en Current 93. In het nu volgende interview dat radiomaker Arno Peters met hen had, legt Peter Christofferson uit hoe in dat klimaat van opkomende punk een collectief als Throbbing Gristle ontstond. Nou, John Balance valt hem dan bij als fan en die was in 1977 17 jaar.
I was in a collective that was called Coom Transmissions with Genesis Peerage and Cozy Fanny Tutti. And we were doing performance art in galleries and...
Wasn't Chris in it too?
No. And travelling around doing performances, conceptual art performances in different places. And we were becoming very frustrated that the fine art world was very narrow and it was only addressing certain kind of people that went to art galleries and not to young people generally and not to the public at large. And so we decided to start making art pieces that were in the form of music and to take some of the styles and some of the genres of rock, but to make sounds that were totally unlike that and sounds that interested us in a subconscious way rather than in a musical way. None of us could play instruments. This was about a year before the beginning of punk, and we started really the notion that it was possible to be successful musically without knowing how to play your instruments. It's just that we never tried, whereas the punk groups tried to play three chords and tried to ape the conventions of the Ramones and people like that. And so it seemed to us that we started at the same time, but what we were doing was pure. What they were doing was tainted and was
retrogressive.
Retrogressive, exactly.
Just dressed in new clothes, really.
And we called our label Industrial Records, and consequence of that was really to start the industrial genre altogether, which was music that supposedly related to the urban landscape and used sounds from the sounds of industry and the sounds of machines and the sounds in the same way that the futurists I guess had done in the 20s and 30s, but for a new audience.
I mean, I was as a fan at whatever age I was, like 14 or 15, to hear Throbbing Gristle for the first time. It was, I'd heard the Damned, I'd heard the Clash, and I just thought they were rock crap. I was never ever interested in rock and roll. And Throbbing Gristle, although they used guitars and bass and originally drums, but the whole aesthetic of it was to reflected the way my life was. I looked out the window and I lived on really boring estates and RAF council, blocks, and what they were putting into their music lyrically and sound-wise was so relevant to me it blew punk out the window. It really did, and Peter invented the word, industrial. He said industrial music for industrial people. And there was a sort of echo of the Warhol Factory, wasn't there, for Jen in that, the music from the Death Factory and stuff. But they were confronting issues that none of the other bands were doing. The other bands were, being dressed by Jasper Conran, the clothes designer. The Clash were, and it was all clothes orientated in the London scene, and it was horrific. And then Throbbing Gristle came along, and they were talking northern slang and used Throbbing Gristle as the northern slang expression, and just talking, using sounds that I could relate to as a disaffected youth. I sort of dressed as a punk, but I listened to Throbbing Gristle and I listened to Per Ubu, who I sort of had a sort of slight thing on the Residents, but Throbbing Gristle, but totally the one that really hit home for me. And from then on, I vowed to follow a similar course, and I connected it with William Burroughs, and I connected it with sort of Kurt Schwitters and Marcel Duchamp and all the few small books in the library at school, and I saw a connection between these things, that it was an art phenomena, but it was an art that you lived rather than that their life was art and art was life. There wasn't a difference, and that really struck me very strongly and still does now, and this is what I hope we are doing now. Cabaret Voltaire and Clock Devier became industrial because of their connections through Throbbing Gristle. Cabaret Voltaire, if you strip it down, they were like, they're the seeds.
The aspects of our use of synthesizers that Chris Carter did, had reference to Kraftwerk, obviously.
Or Tangerine Dream,
but those are basically the main two. But the way that we used them was different because we weren't attempting to make pop music. We were attempting to reach a far deeper current, and nobody really in the contemporary music, so-called pop music culture, used tapes or sampling.
It was so subversive that, and it was only 10 years later that the journalists and the majority of the people understood how subversive that Throbbing Gristle really were, and not just in ideas, but in the sound. When they were being ironic, there was more than one level of irony, and I picked up on that.
The thing that was exciting for us at the time was that it seemed like it was going to be possible to plug into a circuit or a current of kind of disaffected youth and appeal to them in a way that was sort of pure and artistic without incurring any negative connotations of going to art galleries or education or any kind of culture that they might find, they might relate to older people and to things that had nothing to do with them. And so what we were hoping for was to appeal to people directly and bypass the whole kind of cultural system. And I think that to some extent that worked, obviously in small
And strangely enough,
pockets.
a lot of the media backlash you had at the time was that you were all art school people. That you'd all been to art school, which is complete nonsense, whereas most of the punk groups had all been to art school.
Yeah, the reverse is actually true. None of us had ever had any art education, really, was.
That just shows how clever that Throbbing Gristle's camouflage actually was.
Persuasion van Throbbing Gristle uit 1981. Throbbing Gristle betekent trouwens letterlijk vertaald kloppend kraakbeen, maar eigenlijk betekent het in slang erectie. Dit even voor uw informatie. Voor de playlist van vanavond kunt u kijken op www.nps.nl/supplement of een kaartje sturen naar supplement postbus 6 1200 AA in Hilversum. Nadat Throbbing Gristle uit elkaar ging, zijn alle 4 leden zelf verder gegaan met iets anders. Chris Carter en Cozy Fanitutti werden het duo Chris en Cozy en Genesis B. Orridge en Peter Christofferson vormden de formatie Psychic TV. Het aura van chockerend en occult bleef vooral hangen bij Psychic TV en rond frontman Genesis, die zich af en toe manifesteerde als leider van een secte met twijfelachtige reputaties. Dit was de aanleiding voor Peter Christopherson om samen met John Balance de groep COIL, op dat moment nog een side project bij Psychic TV, definitief door te zetten. We vroegen Peter en John om een toelichting. Waarom viel Throbbing Gristle uit elkaar en waarom verlieten ze later ook de cult van Psychic TV?
Because of personal differences within the setup of the
I
four
think
of us.
personal indifferences, wasn't it?
Yeah, it just
that's not true.
we weren't enjoying being together, and the thing about the kind of music that we do is that really the only way to change it, to change the sound of it, is to change the instrumentation. And we'd been through a number of changes within Throbbing Gristle with playing different instruments and stuff, and we just felt that it wasn't any fun, and it's got to be fun, no matter how horrific it is. It has to be fun as well.
It's like a riot can only last for so long, before it becomes choreography,
We wanted to not have a group. We wanted to have an organisation that was going to make TV. That was the very first thing. It was called Psychic Television, and we were going to make.
Was that your phrase as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were going to make, subversive underground TV shows and TV programs in order to carry on the message of what we were doing with the music to a different audience. The first thrust of Psychic TVs as a musical entity was to try and, affect people using these more exotic instruments that they hadn't come across before, and were not just bass and drums and guitar and so on. And at the same time, Genesis was interested in making some money. I wasn't really at the time because I had plenty of money, but he sort of convinced me that it was a good idea to try and take some kind of musical structure to a wider audience, stuff like that. But I was never very particularly comfortable with the idea of doing, arranged strings and stuff at that time, because it felt like a distraction to me from what was the core truth of what we were doing, which was to try and affect people, in a positive way, spiritually and emotionally. And making pop music seemed to me kind of a distraction. Genesis was interested in, as part of the Psychic Television thing, we had a kind of offshoot called the Temple of Psychic Youth, which was intended to try and deprogram people from sort of spiritual cult groups, which we thought were interesting, but at the same time, were fundamentally evil and were limiting people's choice. And we wanted to try and provide a structure or a source of information on deprogramming so people could get free and become independent. Independent just as much of the Christian church as any other kind of Jim Jones temple. And so, we started publishing manifestos for the Temple of Psychic Youth, and as with many of anything that looks like a religious movement, is that people tend to want, especially in England, I think people tend to like to be told what to do, and to be told that this person is the leader and that they have to do what they're told, really. And it's very English. I don't know, maybe it's Dutch too, but certainly in England, people like to be told what to do. So,
the whole thing was formulated and theorized and precisely worked out as a camouflage and a trap. And so when these people who wanted a leader or a cult and a religion to follow wrote in and started to do it, we would say, don't do this, do the opposite, do it for yourself. Unfortunately, Genesis took it on himself to become the leader, and then he stayed the leader. Gary Glitter, leader of the gang. He got stuck there, and we were not happy with that at all. So we left.
Yeah, we weren't interested in being involved in a conventional cult. It seems small-minded and stupid and not interesting in any way.
And tedious and hard work and.
Well, all those stupid people wanting to be told what to do all the time is really a pain in the ass.
U hoorde John Balance en ook Peter Christopherson, de oprichter van COIL, over de uit de hand gelopen cultstatus van Psychic TV, de groep waar COIL min of meer uit voortgekomen is. John Balance, een alias van Jeff Rushton trouwens, was daarvoor ook al actief geweest in de groep Lustmord en had ook solowerk gemaakt. Maar COIL was het gezamenlijke project waar Peter Christopherson en hij zich volledig in kwijt konden. Het komende half uur muziek uit die periode, zo grofweg tussen 1983 en 1985. Allereerst 2 solostukken van Balance, S is for Sleep en Red Weather, gevolgd door Here to Here, waarschijnlijk de eerste track van COIL als duo. Daarna Rape van de gelegenheidsformatie Zoskia, dat enige tijd samen met COIL bestond. En die song is het schokkende relaas van een verkrachting, gezongen of eigenlijk eerder gesproken door het slachtoffer zelf, een vriendin van Balance. Daarna 5 stukken van COIL die op verschillende compilaties verschenen. Toen nog ten dele op cassette en vooral ook op plaat. His Body Was a Playground for the Nazi Elite van de Engelse groep COIL in ongeveer 1984. Tegen die tijd was hun debuutalbum inmiddels verschenen, Scatology. En die titel betekent voor COIL niet alleen een plaagstootje in de richting van de wetenschap die uitwerpselen onderzoekt, maar veel meer een verwijzing naar de alchemie, hoe je van stront goud kan maken. Vertaald in een muzikale parallel hoe geluiden die in de basis onschuldig of betekenisloos lijken, veranderd kunnen worden in veelbetekenende earmovies, zoals John Balance ze noemt. Voor dat proces is de sampler een onmisbaar instrument. Nu heel gebruikelijk, toen nog niet. Je stopt er het geluid van een krekel in en je haalt er na een paar bewerkingen een angstaanjagende atmosfeer uit. U hoort Peter Christopherson.
Scatology was recorded totally on a Fairlight, which was new to us because, few people like Yes had them.
Kate Bush.
But it was unknown for somebody in an underground band to use them, and it certainly is a great experience for me because it's a totally new way of writing and a totally new way of using sound. And in many ways, that instrument has never been, replaced. It did stuff that was unique then, and it's sort of unique today, although you can do it in different ways. It was a great tool, and what we always, from a sort of technical side, we're always looking for tools that will do things that no one's done before. We take great delight in kind of taking technology that's designed to do one thing and using it in a totally opposite way and making it do something that the inventors never imagined was possible. But in fact, it makes sounds that are totally new for people to be stimulated by. So that was the great thing for me, was to do that and make songs that were totally made up of the sound of a Polaroid camera, ejecting the picture, combined with a music cassette of a 12-year-old boy being hit with a stick. And there was one song that was that was the only sound I think that was in it pretty much. So bands like Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer were using a Fairlight on stage basically just to play strings or drum sounds, and just because they didn't want to buy an orchestra, they didn't want to take an orchestra on tour. But as soon as you start putting in sounds that are taken from life, from the real world, you can, as make music. Everybody makes it now, but in those days it was totally new.
It was an oral equivalent of William Burroughs' cut-ups in a way. Yeah. Just a reservoir of stuff that I'd built up since leaving Psychic TV, and it was sort of some of the stuff that I had resented giving to Genesis because we'd get no credit for it. So I have to look at it to
the
remind
concept
myself.
was this scatology was about finding gold in shit, really.
It was alchemy. It was
There's the alchemical aspect of it, but also the fact that one person's shit could be gold for another person and vice versa. You know what I mean? It's just taking that whole area and looking at it in different ways.
And this is where the symbol for COIL is a black sun. We've changed it several times, but it's always a black sun, and that's the alchemical parts. And the magical thing is, when you go into this, it's called Nigredo. No, I don't know. Yes, Nigredo, and all these really are sort of to do with sort of pestilence and the spoiler and murderous tenderness of wolves and panic.
Attentie alstublieft. Het museum gaat over 15 minuten sluiten. U wordt verzocht zich naar de uitgang te begeven.
No, it's been remastered.
Just remastered.
Yeah.
It's basically the same record, but the sound. It's going to be 15 minutes of different languages now.
Well, let's make this into
U luistert nog steeds naar Supplement van NPS en VPRO. Vanavond over de Engelse groep COIL. Op de website kunt u terecht voor de playlist van vanavond. En het adres is www.nps.nl/supplement. Maar u kunt natuurlijk ook een kaartje sturen naar Supplement Postbus 6 1200 AA in Hilversum. De laatste track die we draaiden was Cathedral in Flames van COIL's debuut-LP Scatology uit 1984. En de song is gebaseerd op de film Salo, 120 dagen van Sodom van Pier Pasolini. Dat COIL obsessies heeft voor erotiek of homoerotiek en ook voor obscene of occulte zaken, laten ze in alles weten. Manifesten, songteksten, foto's. COIL put haar inspiratie hiervoor uit allerlei onverwachte hoeken. Kunstenaars als William Blake of Osman Spare, maar ook markante figuren als Marquise de Sade en Aleister Crowley. Vooral die laatste is een belangrijke inspiratiebron. Van hem is COIL's lijfspreuk afkomstig. The price of existence is eternal warfare. Wie is die Aleister Crowley eigenlijk en waarom is hij zo belangrijk? U hoort John Balance.
Aleister Crowley. Well, he's called the wickedest man in the world, but that's by the newspapers, so dismiss that completely.
He was an English eccentric.
He started off very rich. He inherited a large amount of money and went to Cambridge, but dropped out of college and deliberately became a transgressive
Academic
person. He decided to seek out and explore new sins, and to scandalize the society he found himself surrounded by, which he thought was awful and hypocritical and repressed. And his technique for doing this was using magic, sexual magic, and drugs, and anything that he could, and Occidental magic, and what he'd learnt from the East, the Orient. He travelled in the East, and he brought this back and tried to start a sort of new church, as it was, the Church of Thelema. And he had disciples, and he was mad. He was deluded. He was a wife beater. He became addicted to drugs, but at the very core of him, he was an incredibly brave person, because he lived his dream. He lived the vision that he lived. He had a spark in him that was divine, and he acknowledged that every person had this. He said every man and every woman is a star. What he meant by that was that we should all aspire to be superhuman, not in a Nietzschean sense, although he was aware of that, but to live life to their absolute potential and not care a jot for what anybody else thought. If you wanted to dye your hair green and make love in the middle of the street with a dog, if the dog was obliging, then this was okay, But it's the bravery and the persistence throughout his life and all the things he went through. His magical motto when he joined the Golden Dawn was "Perdurabo," which means "I will endure," and he did. One of our phrases, yes, persistence is all. This is deliberately chosen. This is another magical motto that one of the OTO, one of Crowley's church followers had, and I think it's so relevant to COIL now, and to myself, and to the people who we're working with. We persist throughout whatever. We're not interested in trends, not interested in fashions. We're not interested in, we may dip into, we may be like a particular thing, but they come and they go. Whereas we just continue doing what we do, and it all washes over us. We have a pure core that's very, very strong, I think.
Achtereenvolgens Various Hands and the Swelling of Leeches van de LP Nightmare Culture. Een plaat gemaakt samen met de leden van Current 93 onder de gelegenheidsnaam Sickness of Snakes. In 1986 verschijnt dan Horse Rotavator, COIL's tweede album. Peter Christopherson.
It was the beginning really of AIDS, and a lot of our friends were beginning to die, and the single that we took from that record was the first to donate money to AIDS charities, as far as we know. And the video for Tainted Love was caused a big outcry in America because they felt that people were taking advantage of AIDS victims, but at the same time it was totally the opposite, and it's now in the Museum of Modern Art in New York.
Everyone around us, a lot of our friends and sort of quite important associates were dying or had friends who were dying, and we knew we saw the consequences of what was happening with what didn't even have a name. It was called GRID back then.
Great.
Yeah. And we decided, okay, this is happening, but let's explore death in all its aspects, and some of these are quite celebratory explorations of death. Like we went to Mexico, and there they have huge bands and Festival of the Dead.
Yeah.
So that's really the Death album.
The Anal Staircase in een remix door Rico Conning, afkomstig van een EP die verscheen ter gelegenheid van COIL's tweede album Horse Rotovator. Daarvoor Penetralia 2 en Ostia, The Death of Pasolini, genoemd naar de plaats waar Pasolini vermoord werd door een rentboy. John Balance heeft die setting gebruikt als parabel voor de zelfmoord van een vriend, Jumping of the White Cliffs of Dover, dat hebben we net gehoord. COIL heeft vanuit haar achtergrond een ruime ervaring met film en video. Peter Christopherson heeft zelf menige videoclip geregisseerd. Hij doet sinds enige jaren geen muziekvideo's meer, want, zegt hij, de markt is verpest. Er is geen artistieke vrijheid, alleen maar hersenloze imitaties omwille van het succes. En hoewel het COIL financiële vrijheid heeft gegeven, is het niet langer aantrekkelijk om te doen, omdat hij er zoveel tijd en energie in moet steken om dat werk ook te kunnen krijgen. Wel maakt hij af en toe nog commercials, waarvan we er zo meteen ook een aantal zullen laten horen. Filmmuziek heeft COIL ook gemaakt, voor onder meer Derek Jarman's The Angelic Conversation en ook voor Clive Barker's Hellraiser. En dat laatste liep niet goed af. COIL toonde Clive Barker foto's en ideeën uit hun eigen collectie, waar Barker vervolgens mee aan de haal ging.
And we showed him that, and there was a particular image of a penis with about 30 piercings through it.
Being pulled apart.
Yeah, being pulled. Oh, and another one, yes, with a penis being split in half. And both of those he acknowledges as that's where the pinhead image came from. Mm-hmm. And also some of the images that we had on our wall also appear in the film. So, you know, I mean, not blaming Clive Barker, but we were kicked off the film for being too scary. They wanted emotional orchestral music. And bleep me out now if you need to, but this is when we realised that Hollywood was full of cunts. You know, and we don't want to engage with it.
Yeah, that was the first lesson we had in the way that Hollywood works. At the moment, Hollywood is just as with the same with music videos. It's in the grip of a Tommy Hilfiger phenomenon. You know, and all films, basically, a large proportion of Hollywood films, just want to get you to go to the films because it has some cute young star in it. You know, and the emotions are from a cereal packet.
Yeah, it's essential that we do everything we possibly can with our art to destroy this homogeny that is engulfing the whole bloody world.
Enochian Calling One van de soundtrack die COIL maakte voor Derek Jarman's film The Angelic Conversation. En daarvoor een aantal instrumentale commercials, voorafgegaan door Hellraiser Theme, het theme dat geen theme mocht zijn voor Clive Barker's gelijknamige film. U luistert nog steeds naar Supplement van NPS en VPRO, vanavond over de Engelse groep COIL. En voor de playlist kunt u kijken op onze website www.nps.nl/supplement. If you want to take a look at the playlist of this broadcasting tonight, take a look at www.nps.nl/supplement. Maar een kaartje sturen mag ook en dat moet dan naar Supplement Postbus 6 1200 AA in Hilversum. Nu zouden we uitgebreid aandacht kunnen geven aan de vele albums die COIL in de jaren 90 heeft gemaakt, zoals Gold is the Metal, Love's Secret Domain, Stolen and Contaminated Songs of Music to Play in the Dark, maar we hebben gekozen voor iets anders. In 1994 heeft COIL opnames gemaakt voor Trent Reznor's Nothing label. Trent Reznor staat beter bekend als 9 Inch Nails. Deze tracks, bekend onder de naam Backwards, zijn echter nooit uitgebracht, maar wij hebben ze wel voor u. Een absolute première dus, met toestemming van COIL zelf. En het werk geeft goed inzicht in de stijl van COIL in de jaren 90. Gevoelig voor stromingen als techno en electropop, maar wars van conventies. Hier zijn achtereenvolgens Heaven's Blade, Work Lick Whir, Elves, In My Blood en Spastiche. En als eerste een naamloze track opgenomen in 1992 met Tim Simonon van Bomb the Bass. U hoorde onbekend werk van de Engelse groep COIL, opgenomen in 1994 in de studio's van 9 Inch Nails, maar nooit uitgebracht en dus ook niet uitgezonden. U luistert nog steeds naar Supplement, waarin vanavond de groep COIL centraal staat. En we hebben de smaak van premières goed te pakken, want u kunt straks luisteren naar de nog te verschijnen nieuwe EP op COIL's eigen label Eschaton. En dat betreft een samenwerkingsverband met de in Stockholm woonachtige Rus Ivan Pavlov onder de naam Son. Hij werkte al eerder samen met Peter Christopherson en Anne Anxiety op de EP Vox Tinnitus. Overigens betekent zon niet zon, zoals John straks zal uitleggen, maar slaap of droom. En John Balance kondigt de Love Uncut EP zelf aan.
Well, this is an EP that we're releasing on Eschaton. It's going to be Eschaton 33, and it's by a guy called Ivan Pavlov, who's a Russian living in Stockholm, and he has a group called Sun, and it's spelled COH, which is the Cyrillic Russian language. And there's 4 tracks on it. Peter did one, which is a version of Meet Murder My Angel by Soft Cell, and Ivan's done a horrible retro's 80s disco song, but he's done it in an incredibly good, interesting way. Yeah. Digital, but not Mego type digital. There's a track called Prayer for Russell, which is by Steve Thrower.
Who used to be in
COIL, yeah. Which is a really good track. In memory of one of his favourite male porn stars. And a track that I did called Health and Deficiency, which is, I reached an area of myself, I found a persona in myself that I don't really want to ever bring out again, because it
You're still carrying the scars.
drove me mad for about a month afterwards, seriously. So that's interesting.
U hoorde de nieuwe, nog te verschijnen Love Uncut EP op COIL's label Eschaton, een samenwerkingsverband tussen COIL en Ivan Pavlov. En de stukken waren My Angel, de zogenaamde Director's Cut van Soft Cells, Meet Murder My Angel, met vocalen van Peter Christopherson, FF Fetish met vocalen van Ivan Pavlov, gevolgd door Prayer for Russell, een track van ex-COIL-lid Steve Thrower en tenslotte Health and Deficiency door John Balance. Van COIL is bekend dat live optreden niet één van hun favoriete bezigheden is. Veel liever zouden ze een art performance geven in een passende setting, want voor met name John Balance is optreden een ware tour de force. Vorig jaar hebben ze het na lange tijd voor het eerst weer gespeeld op het Sonar Festival in Barcelona. En een saillant detail vandaar was, ze ontmoetten ook Karl-Heinz Stockhausen ter plekke, die zo onder de indruk was dat hij een mogelijke samenwerking in de nabije toekomst niet onmogelijk achtte. Nou, doe maar. Maar wat is er dan zo bijzonder aan een COIL optreden?
I sometimes think that people who are conventional musicians must think that we're appalling because the music we play is almost unlistenable, but in a good way. And generally speaking, always some people walk out if they weren't expecting, if they don't know anything about COIL. But for the people that do know about COIL and that appreciate it, they're pinned to the chair or pinned to the spot where they're standing, and they're totally overcome by the experience. I kind of feel embarrassed, but at the same time, I think it's good.
My take on what we're doing in performance at the moment is there's so much noise and so much visual and oral pollution, posters everywhere and television and radio and absolutely so many records that, I could puke. What we want to do is create a sonic barrage in which people cocoon themselves for an hour, and sort of like as white noise, will mask all the other sounds. In some way, this is what we want to do with the sound and the vibrations and the light.
It would be quite difficult to sit in a COIL concert and think of a Missy Elliott song or a Boston song, you know what I mean?
It's a way of concentrating people's minds on it's putting people in touch with themselves, hopefully, through sound and light.
Aldus John Balance. Nou, ondanks alles hebben ze op 1 juni in een afgeladen Paradiso in Amsterdam gespeeld, COIL. En het was het allereerste optreden in Nederland. En voor deze gelegenheid waren ze uitgebreid met Simon Norris en Thai Paul Sandra. 2 artiesten die zelf ook geen onaardige reputatie hebben. COIL treedt op met computers en synthesizers. Hoe is dan de rolverdeling?
Thai Paul Sandra plays analog equipment. So the position of a knob is very critical to what comes out of the speakers. I mainly mix, and do some vocals, and also play stuff on the Macintosh PowerBook.
More than half of it's live now.
Yeah.
As I say, the basic structure is pre-organized,
Yeah.
but the actual form that it takes and the sound that comes out is spontaneous.
Completely and also completely changeable. It's not a case of sort of DJs fading up and down. We have so many setups that we can feed in, depending on how we feel, and we will talk to each other on the stage, and say, look, let's take it in this direction or that direction. But Thypal Sandra is a classically trained musician and an electronic musician expert. Simon can play, we can play, and I can sing and perform now. So
there are some John Cage pieces we're very good at, aren't there?
U hoorde COIL opgenomen in Paradiso Amsterdam op 1 juni van dit jaar. En ze speelden achtereenvolgens Something, Higher Beings Command, Amethyst Deceivers, What Animal Are You, Blood from the Air, I Am the Green Child en tenslotte Constant Shallowness Leads to Evil. En COIL bestond uit John Balance, vocals en thundersheet, Peter Christofferson, elektronica en mixing, Thypal Sandra synthesizers en ook Simon Norris synthesizers en Tom Edwards marimba. Supplement werd vanavond gemaakt door Arno Peters, bijgestaan in raad en daad door Leendert Dauma.
Nacht, dinsdag 19 juni.